All right, let's jump right into this explainer and absolutely shatter a pretty massive misconception. We so often think that being a great interpreter just means being a passive bilingual speaker. Someone who just happens to know two languages perfectly and simply swaps out the words one by one. But as we're about to uncover, that literally couldn't be further from the truth. So, what's the actual difference between someone who just speaks two languages and a true master level interpreter? Well, normal everyday listening is pretty passive, but interpreting, it is incredibly active. A poor interpreter is essentially just a bucket carrying words and usually dropping a few along the way. A great interpreter, however, is a professional architect of meaning. They're reconstructing a message from the ground up under immense pressure. We've got a fantastic roadmap for you today to show you exactly how they pull this off. We'll be covering 1. Words versus true meaning. 2. The 5 levels of listening. 3. Consecutive versus simultaneous interpreting. 4. When to be exact. And finally, 5. Paraphrasing and summarizing skills. Okay, Section 1, Words versus true meaning. Let's look at the foundational mindset that firmly separates the amateurs from the true masters. Think about how a literal word-for-word translation totally misses the mark. If a speaker says, "We need to take a step back," a poor interpreter translates the physical action, saying something like, "We need to make one step backward." It sounds completely unnatural, right? But the great interpreter perfectly captures the actual functional intent. They'll say, "We need to understand the situation as a whole." They aren't translating words, they're translating thought units. And this hits the nail on the head regarding why poor interpreters are so trapped by vocabulary. Imagine trying to literally translate the idiom, "let's not put the cart before the horse," into a language that doesn't even use that expression. If you force the listener to suddenly picture farm animals and wooden carts in the middle of a tense corporate boardroom, you're going to confuse them entirely. The master interpreter skips the imagery altogether and delivers the pure meaning. Let's not do things in the wrong order. Great interpreters focus on the function of a sentence. Take a phrase like, "with all due respect." A poor interpreter might translate it literally, making it sound wonderfully polite but incredibly weak. But a great interpreter knows how to preserve that hidden diplomatic tension. They rebuild the sentence to convey the exact level of professional disagreement without awkwardly dragging over the grammatical skeleton of the original language. Moving right along to Section 2, the 5 levels of listening. To achieve that kind of precise meaning transfer in real time, we really have to explore the immense cognitive load happening behind the scenes. While you and I might just listen to the words being spoken, a great interpreter is actively peeling back the layers of an onion. They're simultaneously analyzing the literal vocabulary, the underlying meaning, the emotional tone, like is it ironic, angry, or diplomatic, the logical structure of where the argument is actually heading, and finally the intent, the ultimate why behind the speech. So how on earth do they manage all this data without just freezing up? They use highly structured note-taking. If a speaker gives a long, complex sentence about financials, the interpreter doesn't try to write it out word for word. They'd fall behind instantly. Instead, they capture the skeleton using symbols, logic, and arrows. Things like sales up 18%, why? Delivery up, but margin down, why? Food cost up. The crucial takeaway here is that poor interpreters try to remember isolated nouns, which just quickly fall right out of their heads. Great ones remember mental structures. By mapping out the cause, the effect, and the consequence, the message becomes so much easier to organically reproduce when it's their turn to speak. They aren't remembering words, they're remembering logic. Section 3, Consecutive versus Simultaneous Interpreting. Let's examine the two distinctly different battlegrounds where these professionals actually operate. There is a massive difference in stakes between the two modes. In consecutive interpreting, which you'll often see in courtrooms or negotiations, the speaker actually pauses, and the main challenge is your short-term memory. The danger is simply forgetting details. But in simultaneous interpreting, used at those huge global conferences, you're listening and speaking at the exact same time. It's an extreme test of divided attention where the biggest danger is falling behind. In simultaneous interpreting, professionals have to master something called the ear-voice span, or the lag. They have to maintain a perfect strategic distance from the speaker. It's a tightrope walk. If you stay too close, you end up doing an awkward word-for-word translation because you don't know where the sentence is going. But if you lag too far behind, your short-term memory completely overloads and short-circuits. To manage that lag, they rely on a secret weapon: anticipation. They literally use logic and grammar to predict the future. If a speaker starts a sentence with, "If we do not reduce costs now," the interpreter already knows a negative financial consequence is coming. They don't have to wait for every single word. The logical trajectory is already telegraphed. Section 4. When do we exact? Because actually, scratch all that fluid reformulation for a second. There is a very specific time when all of that must suddenly stop. Great interpreters know exactly when flexibility becomes a dangerous liability. When it comes to numbers, dates, prices, legal clauses, or medical instructions, the interpreter rigidly protects those specific data points. You absolutely cannot organically paraphrase a medical dosage or a contract's expiration date. In these moments, they shift gears entirely to guarantee 100% exactness to prevent devastating errors. They're also ethically disciplined to act as completely neutral conduits. This means perfectly matching the speaker's register, basically the social temperature of the room. If a speaker is aggressive, the interpreter must be aggressive. If the speaker is vague, the interpreter conveys that exact level of uncertainty. They never soften a harsh message or insert their own personal spin to make a point sound better. And finally, Section 5, paraphrasing and summarizing skills. Let's zoom out from the professional interpreting booth and translate these incredible techniques into universal communication tools that you and I can use every single day. First, we have to distinguish between two skills that might seem identical but serve totally different purposes. Paraphrasing is about saying the exact same thing differently for naturalness or clarity. Summarizing, on the other hand, is the art of giving only the main point by aggressively reducing the word count and cutting out all the fluff. If you want to paraphrase effectively without just awkwardly swapping out synonyms from a thesaurus, follow this simple toolkit. First, understand the intent. Second, and this is absolutely crucial, look away from the original text. If you don't look away, you'll accidentally copy its grammatical structure. Third, explain it out loud as if talking to a smart friend. And fourth, double-check that you kept the original tone. Conversely, when summarizing complex information, say for a quick executive summary to your boss, use this method. Find the topic, find the author's claim about that topic, and then ruthlessly filter out the decorative language and examples. Keep distilling it down until you're left with just one clean, powerful sentence. Let's look at a quick example of this in action. A poor summarizer just lists a messy string of operational details. They improved packaging, added photos, created lunch offers. But the expert synthesizer instantly identifies the underlying business strategy. They'll just say, the restaurant increased delivery sales by improving the customer experience and promoting better offers. That is how you deliver real value. So whether you're interpreting a high-stakes diplomatic summit, writing a project update, or just trying to explain a cool new idea to a friend, remember this core principle. Dumping a bucket of literal words on someone almost always results in a broken, confusing message. You have to be the architect carrying the meaning. It all comes down to this remarkable truth about human connection. Great interpreters move meaning, tone, logic, and intention from one mind to another. So the next time you communicate, whether in an email, a pitch, or just a simple conversation, I want you to ask yourself a provocative question. Are you just making noise, or are you truly moving intention from your mind to theirs?